Hey everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to another week of the Inner RAE podcast. Today is a very exciting day because we are reflecting on our 6 months of podcasting, and we'll be sharing our lessons learned and insights gained. And we are just stoked to have you here with us along this journey. With that, I'm Katie, and I'm so happy to be here with you all.
And I'm Erin. And yes, this episode is very special. I just want to say I am really proud of us for
Yeah.
making it this far. We've gone every week since March 21st, I believe, was our very first episode. And so this makes it episode 26, the
Mm.
halfway point. And I'm just really proud of us and excited to celebrate the small wins, the big wins, and just reflect together with our community and our audience because you guys have also made it so that this commitment has so much meaning and depth. So,
Mm,
yeah,
yeah.
excited to dive in. So I'll pass it back to you, Katie.
All right. First of all, I want to take a moment to thank all of you. Sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, I also know from the bottom of Aaron's, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for sharing and thank you for supporting us. Starting a podcast is not the easiest thing in the world to do. And we're going to get into some of the reasons why that is that were expected and unexpected challenges along this path. But ultimately, we wouldn't be here without you guys. And it is so rewarding being able to show up together and speak about the things that we care so deeply about. And also getting to know that it's resonating with you and it's making an impact in your heart and in your head and in your hands and the way that you move about the world. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And also, it's so easy to pass over celebrating. We celebrate birthdays, we celebrate big events, and so many times we don't take the time to celebrate the little wins, and can focus so much on the things that aren't going right in our life, but it is just as important, if not more important, to celebrate the wins and to really build up that reward network in our brain that is celebrating what we are doing when we are trusting the next right step. So thank you for being here and for helping us celebrate. We just notice and we care and we really appreciate you. I want Erin to share some of the milestones, big and small, that we have hit that are all because of you guys.
Yeah, absolutely, Katie, to all of that. And I'll just make a quick note about the human brain. It is natural and normal, especially when you have trauma, which most people tuning in, as I've said before, all of us have some form of trauma, some flavor of trauma. But it's so important to do that work to shift into a gratitude and celebratory mindset because our brain is really good at collecting what's scary, what's wrong, what we need to improve. And so it's just important to balance it. So, in that vein, I would like to just share that as we're recording this, we're a couple downloads away from hitting 1,000 downloads, which
Woo.
means that very likely, unless all of a sudden nobody was listening to this, by the time this episode comes out in a couple weeks, we will definitely have surpassed that milestone. And there's this interesting thing that my ego wants to do, which is I didn't really want to share that because I was like, what if somebody else's podcast got 1,000 downloads in the first month and then I've just made us look bad? But the truth is, I don't really care about anybody else's podcast. We've had 1,000 downloads and that's
Mhm.
just really cool. And I just want to thank each of you for that. Also, statistically, most podcasts don't last this long. I think so many things. People are like, oh, I want to start a podcast. And that's great. And you should do it. And it's okay if you don't make it 6 months when you do it because it is a creative endeavor, it is an expressive art. And it's okay to try something and decide that you don't like it. But it's also important to celebrate that here we are, 6 months in, 1,000 downloads in, and I don't feel like I'm even close to wanting to give up. I feel like we're just getting started. So, that's the second big milestone I want to acknowledge. And also, and I'm very proud of this statistic, when I was doing some research about podcasts, there's like a podcast number of downloads. There's a lot of kind of podcast statistics that I had to learn along the way. And while numbers sometimes don't count and don't really matter, they're still cool to see progress, right?
Mhm.
And we've been hitting for the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's this number of downloads in a first week where if you reach this many, you're in the top 50% of podcasts. And we reached that number 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I'm just proud of the messaging that we've created such that people are consistently subscribing and listening and sharing. The other thing is we have a couple really good reviews on the podcast. And when we got our very first one, it's funny because they make you make up a screen name or whatever. So I didn't exactly know who it was. And I found out a couple weeks later who it was. And it was the most meaningful thing to know that people not only took time to listen, but also slowed down enough to leave us a heartfelt, thoughtful message supporting us. Because as much as by the end product, this sounds like, oh, it's really easy. Erin and Katie just sit down and have a conversation. There's been a lot of effort that's gone into and thoughtfulness that's gone into the curation of this product. And while
Mhm.
some of it is easy and it flows well, there have definitely been sticky moments. Anytime someone takes the time to give us feedback, whether it be in an email, a message, a phone call, a text, or an actual review, those are big milestones every single time. Katie, are there any other milestones or celebrations that I've missed, or do you think I covered them all?
I think you covered them all. The other thing, though, that I'm hearing is really just celebrating commitment.
Mm,
And I think that's something that's important for everybody listening too. Celebrate your commitments. Like when you set out and you do what you set out to do and you overcome the hurdles, you jump over them and you go into the deep, dark pits and you go into the caves and you keep going. There is something to celebrate there. And it would have been easier a couple of times to be like, "All right, like, we did it. Peace out, y'all. Like, thanks for listening, but we're through here." But we didn't, and we came into better relationship with each other and with ourselves through honoring our commitment to doing this, and we also really gained deeper intimacy into ourselves and into each other in doing this. And this kind of leads into the next section, which is all about our challenges and lessons, which is how that inner critic likes to take a bat to that commitment sometimes and be like, "Are you sure you want to keep doing this? Like, you sounded dumb on that. Like, you could have said that better. Ooh, like, you don't look very good today." There are so many examples of the voices that came up during this. It was insane. And I know for me personally, I know you share this too, Erin, this perfectionist tendency within me. And I know if you guys listen to my story, like my throat chakra has been blocked for a long time. I had some very dusty pipes. In one-on-one conversation, it was fine, but in this type of thing, choked. And having this medium has really allowed energy to flow through me and learn to really trust my heart and the ways in which it wants to express itself. Couldn't be here without you all. And thank you for helping me get in tune and in touch with these inner critic voices inside.
yeah, I have a lot of friends living in Nashville who are musicians and artists. And I've always said, I know I have a voice, I know I have a message, but I couldn't imagine doing something like putting out an album for people to just consume and have their own opinions and it's just out there. And once people have it, I can't change it, I can't explain it. And I have this wound of feeling misunderstood. And so for me, I want to start at the beginning of what those voices sounded like. Because if you're listening and there's something creative or something brave or something new you're trying to do, maybe you'll resonate with some of the things that came up for me that, to be honest, really have gone away just by
Mhm.
showing up and practicing this creative expressive outlet. So, my very first voice was, who do you think you are?
Mhm.
Who do you think you are? Like, why would people want to listen to you? What do
Mhm.
you have to share that's so important that you need to put it out in the world in this package for people? So that was the first one. In the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, I've talked a lot about her in previous podcasts, but I had to just replay that audiobook just to get myself to not chicken out and show up for the very first episode. Another big critical voice, because we do this both in video and audio format. Most of you are probably listening to the audio recording. We record these, and I over the years, I'm in recovery from an eating disorder. I'm also just a person in a capitalistic world where we're constantly being bombarded with messages about how we don't look right, we're not aging correctly, we're not eating properly, we're not exercising the right way, like whatever it is. And so for me to just show up week after week and just have exposure therapy of having myself be recorded, putting myself out there for people to have opinions, when the truth is, like, very few people are thinking about that, because 'cause I'm certainly not thinking about that when I'm consuming someone else's content. But that was a big voice that came up. And another thing that came up for me, which kinda ties into the first one of who do you think you are, it was also this equal and opposite voice of, "Oh, everybody else is doing it.
Mhm.
It's too late. It's podcasting is, like, passé. If everyone else is doing it, then there's no room for me because the market is saturated for podcasts, which is hilarious. How many people go to write a book and say, I don't know, there's just libraries of books. So
Right.
therefore I shouldn't write a book. Or how many artists are like, I'm not going to release an album because my friend released an album the other day.
Mhm.
But that voice was really wanting me to just stay small. If I
Mhm.
couldn't be unique enough, but then also if I couldn't blend in enough. And
Mhm.
so there's just no winning with that egoic voice that don't shine too bright. People will have opinions. Those were all voices I consistently had to work through to even get started. Never mind the voices that came up throughout the journey, but just to even start this process. That was what my inner world sounded like.
Yeah. All of those same things were coming up inside of me, and I remember back to our first recording, and it truly felt like my heart was beating out of my chest, like, crazy anxiety. It was like, "Oh my god, like, what are you doing? Stop. Don't even begin this." And now I can say it's like showing up to this just feels normal, it feels good, it feels exciting. Sometimes my heart pounds when we're going into a really, really important topic because I feel like we now have a platform to really honor the gravity of some of the conversations that we're having, and that feels really meaningful, and so, of course, your heart's gonna pound, you're teetering on something that is important to you. There has been so, so, so many voices that have come up, and it's been so incredible being able to honor those voices, but also help them transform and help them integrate into our being. The other thing that we learned through this, and this relates to commitment, is so we do this with clients, is the importance of setting up weekly check-ins. Well, that's been a huge part of our journey. Like, we ended up recording a podcast on that because a couple months in, we were like, huh, okay, so we've just hit new momentum. Like, we're in a new thing here. We need to take a look at what we've been doing and how we can get better at this. And let's make sure we're syncing up and creating a ritual and a rhythm around our process. And it's such a good metaphor for in all relationships to do this, and one that we had to learn together through this medium, which was really fun and cool to get to experience together.
And in that syncing up, another way to articulate a very similar idea is the masculine and the feminine energy needs to be balanced.
Mhm.
And Katie and I have a great mixture of those energies. And also, we had to be intentional about balancing them because you know what? I don't wake up every day in the best mood or in the highest version of myself. Katie doesn't wake up every day. I can't speak for her, but I would assume. So there were going to be days where we had to support each other, where maybe I had to be a little more structured than I would be on another day, or I had to admit that I didn't have the structuring ability in me that day and I needed Katie to support and hold the containers. Taking time to sync up taking time to be thoughtful about our strengths. Another big thing I learned very recently is that as much as I know that Katie and I mutually admire each other, we weren't taking time to share that with each other. There was just this assumption that we recognized each other and we appreciated each other. But we've started adding that in to most of our meetings where we take time to recognize what we really like about what we did. So we recognize ourselves and then we take time to recognize each other and what we both experienced in the other as something that went really well.
Yeah.
These are all lessons that I think you can learn in any relationship dynamic, but through the container of a podcast where we are trying to broadcast our inner radiant authentic energy, that doesn't just show up out of nowhere. We worked for it. Yes, there's an element of authenticity. There's an element of your inner ray that is organic and natural and shows up at all times. And also, there is an uncovering and peeling back process that's intentional because when we go out into the world, it's human nature to armor up, it's human nature to lose track of. There's a lot of distractions in our culture. So, anyway, I'm on a rant, but I think this whole process has just been such a metaphor for us to practice the
Mhm.
very curriculum that we utilize in our coaching sessions.
Yeah. Speaking of syncing up, and I'm thinking of synchronicity too. When you trust the inclination, the intuition, the hit to do something, and you commit to taking the next right step, that alignment and feedback from that alignment starts to really show through synchronicity. And that's something we were talking about of, oh, wow, we've received a lot of good feedback. And instead of going into what that feedback looks like, we just wanted to raise how that feedback shows up, which is through synchronicity and through divine timing. People found us and found episodes that we were recording in the times that they needed it the most. And that is so awesome because ultimately, that's why we're here. We want to create a platform through which we can share the things that have helped us in our journey and are helping us in our journey because it never ends. And so it's so incredible to see and create space for more synchronicity in your life by trusting the next right step and doing what feels in alignment, no matter how hard that may feel. Because when you do that, things start to flow more effortlessly, even though it might take a little bit of effort at the beginning to get going.
Absolutely. Some of the gifts that I have gotten direct feedback from about the podcast is I maybe have been coaching someone for a while and talking to them about a certain concept. And then I'll be like, oh, by the way, Katie and I recorded an episode on that. And they'll go and they'll listen to it. And then they come to the next session with a whole new profound shift because for whatever reason, they just weren't absorbing the material
Mhm.
during the session. And I say to my clients all the time, one of the reasons Katie and I are available for check ins between sessions is that the real recovery, the real growth happens between the sessions. So, having the podcast and having people actually tell me, yeah, that's exactly what happened. I went and I listened to that episode and it really concretized this thing that I was not getting in the session, even though I know I'm good at explaining things. And they would even say to me, you literally said the same thing to me in the session, but for some reason, listening to the podcast while I was on a hike, I can tell you the biological reasons that is, but they're like, for some reason, it hit me differently. And I'm like, absolutely. That is the gift of this medium. And for me, as someone who is so passionate about helping people see that this process to authenticity, this process to cultivating and broadcasting your inner ray can be easy. It doesn't have to be this trudge through life. Creating something that is so easy for people to access, that they don't have to pay for, that someone can just say, hey, I heard this cool thing and let me share it with you. And I don't need to be there for that transmission to occur. That's the gift of music. That's the gift of all art is
Mhm.
that it can say so much more after the person is no longer actually there to give that transmission. This has been just such a gift for me, for the clients, and it goes into the next thing we were going to talk about,
Yeah, it
right?
does.
The
Yeah.
synchronicity leads right into the community building.
Yeah. It's been so beautiful building this learning community with you all. And it reminds me of something that we studied a lot when I was getting my master's, which is this idea of triple loop learning. It's a reflective practice, and it's a way to really unleash creativity, but also really water the seeds that you're planting, right? So, what we're talking about is like, if you think about a seed, you have to plant it in the ground, it's in the dark, and then you have to water it for it to grow. And then it starts to root, then it starts to seed, then it starts to sprout, right? And so podcast is another way to really water it. But the whole triple loop learning, I'll just give a quick explanation of how that plays out is the first loop is about acting and changing your behavior. We started by trusting an intuitive hit that we need to start a podcast. We started learning the art of podcasting and we asked, okay, what are we doing? Like, how are we going to do it? Are we doing things right? I don't know. We'll see. Let's just start. We started the podcast because we wanted to share the curriculum with you guys. And Erin had tried writing a book. I had tried writing a book. And we were like, wow, every conversation we have, we wish we were just recording. We were like, oh. So then that was first stage. Then it's double loop, which is about like reframing and changing our thinking. Okay, so we've got this. Now let's make this better. This was like our sync up episode of, okay, we've been doing this for a while. This has been working, but there's a way to make this better. Are we doing things right? How do we keep improving? Then it's triple loop, which is all about transformation. Okay, so what's the big why? Like, why are we doing this? How does this relate to our purpose and our mission? How can we change our perceptions around starting this in the first place? What has shifted and changed? And what do we need to continue to actively transform? What does success look like? What haven't we thought of? And so at each of these stages, like we learn something about ourselves individually, about each other, and about our relationship, and about the Inner RAE community at large, which is such a beautiful gift. And so I just wanted to share that cycle with you guys because ultimately that same process is accompanying you in your journey as well. And so just think about the different ways in which you are watering this initial seed within your life as you start this self-discovery journey and come into right relationship with your parts and with your heart and with your soul. Yeah. Erin, what do you think about that?
There's so many different directions I could take that. First of all, I love that concept of the triple loop learning, and it applies to ourselves, our relation to the podcast, but also, like I was mentioning just a few minutes ago, clients, right? So
Yeah.
I can present a topic to a client in a session, and then they get on the podcast, and maybe they hear you tell a story that takes it to a deeper level. It's not just, okay, these are the mechanics of boundaries, right? This is a
Mhm.
concept that I'm learning. But they get to actually hear it in action through you. Or maybe they've gone out into their life and practiced the boundary, and then they've
Mhm.
been able to hear about it in an episode. And then by the time they come back to the next session, or they go to use a boundary or do something boundaried in their life, there is this deeper level of, I had a client say to me the other day, we'd actually done an intensive. And she said to me, oh, I never realized before that self abandonment doesn't just harm me, it actually harms my relationships. So that's
Mm.
an example of, okay, there's the original lesson of this definition. This is self abandonment, and these are
Mhm.
boundaries. Then the second lesson is, oh, when I abandon myself, I harm myself. And then there's the bigger lesson of, okay, not only do I harm myself, but I'm actually harming other people. And so I feel like that's what you're
It is.
explaining, but you can tell me if that sounds right.
No, that's exactly what I'm explaining in a perfect way that it shows up. It shows up at different scales, different levels, different layers. But ultimately, the lesson, in my opinion, around this is really just giving ourselves space and time for lessons to sink in. And this relates back to that inner critic voice. It can be so harsh sometimes. Why aren't you getting this? What is wrong with you? What is flawed about you? What's so broken that you can't do this right? But that's not our heart, right? That's coming from a wounded voice in our head. So just remembering that it does take time and it does take loops. This is something that is a studied way of learning. So give yourself patience. Gift yourself the joy of patience and gentleness and space as you are learning about yourself and learning to apply lessons and integrate them into your life because transformation takes time. A seed does not grow into a tree overnight. It just doesn't.
And I'll be completely honest, I hope this doesn't come across as I don't know what I think it's gonna come across, but I will re-listen to our episodes and I'm like, "Oh, like, I'm
Yep.
learning from our episodes." And
Totally.
so I just need to admit that to you guys.
Yeah.
Like, I've always had that experience with coaching where I'll be coaching someone and I'll hear myself say something and I'm like, "Oh, that's really cool. I should apply that to myself."
Mhm.
But listening to the podcast episodes, even though and this is gonna get a little bit into some woo-woo spirituality thing, but I'm definitely, and I know this is true for Katie, I am channeling sometimes. Like,
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't fully know what it is that I'm saying until I go back and I listen later, and I'm like, "Oh, that was really cool." And
Yep.
there's definitely been curriculum and concepts that have shifted and changed through this expressive creative medium. So, all in all, there have been so many wonderful, beautiful lessons just from making this commitment and from showing up every week and letting things unfold. For me, it's that balance of, yes, I went into the unknown. We went into the unknown together. And also, we planned a little and we had
Mhm.
structure and we had a format of what we were going to do. And then it took a life of its own. And it's
Yep.
been a beautiful growing experience for me. And I remember there was a time when I would never have done something so vulnerable or something that I didn't already know how to do. So
Yep.
I'm proud of us.
I'm proud of us too. Yeah, it's been such a fun journey. I think with that, Erin, I'm curious. We usually end our episodes, right, with a question. So you might know this is coming. Name someone in the public eye broadcasting their inner ray, inspiring you to live your most radiant, authentic life.
I'm excited to share this one. I am actually admittedly not a big consumer of podcasts. It's just something that I really like silence and I like sound and music when I'm relaxing. However, there has been one podcast in particular that I have spent a lot of time listening to and looking to when wanting to create our podcast. And there's this woman named Ardelia Lee, and she
Mm,
has a podcast called That Projector Life. Side note for listeners, I'm a big fan, and so is Katie of human design. I'm actually getting
mm,
trained in quantum human design, but Katie and I are both projectors in human design. And hearing how Ardelia really uses her, what they call your projector magic, which is that by just taking time to fully, uniquely, authentically be herself in the messiness, in the chaos. And she has this theory too as a projector because she does the podcast alone that when she doesn't have the energy, she just doesn't do a podcast.
mm,
And so watching her model how effective and helpful her podcast is, even though she's not actually that consistent, which is a big like thing for me. I wanted this podcast to be really consistent, but just watching her show up when she can, when she has the energy. I don't even think she edits her podcast, which I
mm,
also have to admit, I definitely edit our podcast because
mm,
that's just, I'm
mm.
very into making things curated and effective for people. But I love listening to her and her podcast because she's very knowledgeable. And also in the middle of it, her kids might interrupt her or she might repeat herself 3 times or completely forget something she was gonna say, and she'll just pause and start over and not edit any of it out. I just admire that so much, and I'm not saying I'm ever gonna be that kind of podcast. Her courage and her bravery to just put herself out there and just be exactly who she is was a huge step towards me feeling comfortable and ready and just having a model of what that could be like, especially as a human design projector where I do know that when I am in alignment with my true self, the impact of the message is going to go much broader and much farther than if I'm trying to force myself into something that doesn't really resonate with me.
I love that. Makes me feel inspired and I have the same experience and that's what's helped me be here too from different podcasts that I've listened to. So thank you guys. In the spirit of this milestone, as we close out, if you've been listening, could you take a moment and write us a review? If you have been listening all along or you're new to the podcast and your ears are fresh to our voice, let us know what you think. And also let us know if there's any topics that you want us to dive into. We love piggybacking off of things that are really alive in your life. So let us know. And if there's anyone you've been meaning to share this with, share it. We wouldn't be here without you guys. So we just wanted to figure out ways we can connect more with you and really tend to and engage with the community in any way that we can. So,
Yeah, and send us an email, a message on Instagram, wherever it is that you're connected with us, because the truth is, everything that we're doing can be adapted and changed. If people consistently have topics that they want to hear more about, we can do a series on that. If you really like it when we interview people, we can do that a little bit more. If you're getting bored with the who's broadcasting their inner Ray question and you want us to throw in a different weekly question, we can do that too. I don't feel married to our format. I enjoy it. I like the comfort of it. And also, it could be fun and exciting to get some listener feedback. So, we would love to hear from you, whether it be leaving us a review, sending us a message. All of our contact info are in the show notes. And yeah, we just appreciate you so much and cannot wait until we're back with you next week.
thank you guys for listening.
Bye.
Bye.